What does Tucker Carlson think about eschatology and the 2022 election? Hi, I'm Ken Yates from Grace Evangelical Society, and I'd like to spend just a few minutes discussing that question. I'd like to do so using a video that Tucker Carlson made with an interview he had with a man by the name of Andrew Isker. Andrew Isker is a pastor who is originally from Minnesota, who has recently moved to Tennessee. And Tucker is discussing with Andrew his views on eschatology and the 2022 election. And even though it's Andrew Isker's view, it is clear that Tucker Carlson believes that Andrew is making some good points. What I'd like to do, first of all, is to show the clip. And so if we could show the clip right now, that'd be a good place to start.
Ridge Runner is purchasing land and sort of facilitating a lot of things. Like, you're familiar with the big sort, where people are leaving blue states to go to red states. Yes. And things like that, where it's along those lines where people are leaving. Like, I left Minnesota, a very blue state. Everyone's now familiar with our governor in that state, Tim Walz.
Don't hire him to babysit.
No, I would not. He would be the last person.
Yes, I think so.
So we wanted to leave there. Many people want to leave places like that. My friend CJ left California, Gavin Newsom state, to come to Tennessee, and so it's a platform to be able to draw all of your friends together. It's like, well, we can kind of live anywhere. Why don't we all live in the same kind of place and bring our families, bring our businesses, and build things together? So it's sort of a platform for drawing people that are spread out all throughout the country and can leave these places that are not great. Living in large cities or suburbs where you're just totally disconnected and really isolated, alienated from normal life, and you can have the American small town experience once again.
It's so sad to hear you say that about Minnesota. As a Scandinavian, I always thought of it, was told, it's like where all the Swedes are, and it's kind of, lots of saunas and, red-cheeked children, and it's clean and reasonable,
Yeah.
Not the case anymore. Why did you leave there?
For us, it was...
Are you from there?
I'm from there, yeah. Born and raised in Waseca, Minnesota. My children were the sixth generation of our family that lived in that town.
Oh, gosh.
And
in the town?
In that town, yeah. In the town of Waseca.
Are your ancestors buried there?
Yeah, there's 6 generations that are buried there. Even one of my own children that passed. That all there. Like, we lived a couple blocks away from the cemetery where all of my ancestors were buried.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very heavy to leave a place like that.
Yes. And it was after the 2022 election, where the Democrats took control of the state Senate finally, and Tim Walz could do whatever he wanted to do. He the first thing he passed was in the wake of the Dobbs decision, full abortion allowance, even up to birth. Like, there were the stories during the election about even like post-birth abortions that took place in Minnesota.
Yes.
I went to the state capitol and spoke to the first committee when that bill was being heard, and I mean, maybe later your guys can pull up that video, but I just went there and said, like, hey, you think you won an election, you think you can do this and just murder children, but God is not mocked. Like, he's going to come with vengeance about what you are doing. And of course,
there are consequences.
Yeah, they're like all these 60-year-old liberal ladies, senators, are looking at me, scoffing at me, and just staring daggers at me and hating what I'm saying. How dare he come? This
lots of
Christian nationalist. Come here.
Lots of luck to them.
And so that's the first bill that they passed. The second bill that they passed, and these are the first 2 legislative priorities that they had. The second one was a trans rights bill, which allowed the state to take your child out of their custody, or the parent's custody, if you opposed a transition.
As you can tell from the clip, Andrew is what we would say post-millennial. Later on in this interview, he makes it very clear that he is against dispensationalism. And we're going to have another video on that. But dispensationalism holds the view that the world is going to get progressively worse, that there's a great tribulation coming. Well, Andrew does not agree with that. A postmillennialist believes that we are called to, the church is called to make society better. He mentions the Puritans, for example, and the Puritans left Europe and came to the United States to create a new world, if you will, where there is religious freedom and where they could serve God according to their own conscience and things like that. And that is what Andrew Isker is doing. He left Minnesota, and if you watch the clip, you saw that it was a tough decision for him. He has 6 generations in his family that have lived in the same town. And in fact, he has had a child who died, and they buried that child in that hometown. So why are they moving to Tennessee? Well, as he discussed on the clip, it's because of the 2022 election that Minnesota took a sharp turn to liberal politics. Tim Walz is the governor, and he mentioned 2 particular things that caused him problems. One was a very drastic abortion bill, and the other was transgender rights. And he talked about how he went to the legislature and he argued against these liberal views or these liberal bills that were being passed. And he talks about that he has a child with autism, and even though they homeschool their other children, this child with special needs has to go to public school, and he and his wife does not want this child of theirs to be exposed to transgenderism and liberal views within the school. And so what he has decided to do was to start this new community in Tennessee. And it's very much like the Puritans starting a new world in what would become the United States when they left Europe. And so we can see that his eschatology, Isker's eschatology, is impacting his life in many, many ways. He left the town in which he was born. His grandparents lived. His great-grandparents lived. His child is buried there. And he's seeking like-minded conservative believers to go to a place where they can live together and, even though it's not specifically mentioned, make a better world for themselves, to improve the world that they live in. And this is right in line, in one way, with post-millennial thought, which is what the Puritans were. But we need to ask a question, is this what the Bible teaches us? Now, certainly as believers, as a dispensationalist, I would say you're free to do that. Absolutely. Go to Tennessee if you live in a state where you don't like the policies and you can go somewhere else that you like it better. That's certainly an option. But what I would argue is there's also another option, and that is to be a light where you're at, if it's bad where you're at. And certainly a believer could make that decision, right? I mean, he would not be wrong if he said, you know what, Minnesota is really in bad shape. It needs a righteous light in the middle of it, and decide to stay there. That would be just as legitimate as any other option that he's thinking about doing. I remember when I was in seminary, I had a professor named Harold Honer, and this was a long time ago, and we were discussing one day in class about homeschooling. This was when homeschooling first really started. And there were many of the students in the seminary class who were arguing, well, no, we got to take our kids out of school. We've got to homeschool them because of all that was going on in the schools at that time. And this was back in the 80s. Okay. And that made sense to me. And that seems to be kind of like what Isker's arguing here. But Harold Hoehner gave another view. And what he said was, my wife and I have decided to leave our children in the public schools to be a witness and a light in that school system. So Harold Hoehner argued that he was going to leave his children in the school system to be a witness for them. And it seems to me that if Isker is saying that this is what believers should do, should leave these liberal areas if there's election, and this was the midterms in the 2022 election, to move someplace where, what would we say, more righteous laws exist, more conservative views on abortion, or more conservative views on transgenderism. If he sees this as fulfilling a post-millennial view that we need to make the world better, it can be just as easily argued that you can make the world better by staying where it's bad. You want to make the bad better. So it's just interesting to me that as Tucker Carlson and Andrew Isker is arguing this point or discussing this point, one thing we definitely see, a lot of times people say that your eschatology isn't that important. But we can see that in the case of Andrew Isker, and Tucker Carlson appears to be in agreement with him, that our eschatology can have dramatic impact upon our lives. Either, in his case, moving from Minnesota to Tennessee to start a new Christian conservative community, or if a believer said, listen, it's not good for me, it's not good for my family, but I'm going to stay here to be a witness in this community to make it better. My personal view is, as a believer, the Bible gives us the freedom to do that, whichever one you want to do, but it's not a commandment of God. I think Harold Hoehner had his view, and so did the students in my seminary class who were arguing the exact opposite view of what they ought to do about homeschooling. Same thing about Daniel Isker moving to Tennessee from Minnesota. If you like this video, I'd ask that you'd press the like button and the subscribe button. And remember, keep grace in focus.